Welcome. This is James Corbett of the Corbett Report with your EyeOpener report for BoilingFrogsPost.com. When the Shanghai Five held its first presidential summit in China in 1996, this innocuous group hardly registered as a blip on the geopolitical radar. Within just 5 years, however, the loose-knit cooperative organization of China, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Russia, and Tajikistan was already attracting the attention of some of the premier globalist institutions as a potential opponent to Western imperial hegemony. In May of 2001, then Brookings Institute director Bates Gill wrote an op-ed entitled Shanghai Five, an attempt to counter U.S. influence in Asia, which openly frets about the group's growing clout. In one particularly prescient passage for our post-Libyan era, Gill highlights a statement from the group's 2000 summit declaration proclaiming that the five partners will oppose intervention in other countries' internal affairs on the pretexts of humanitarianism and protecting human rights, and support the efforts of one another in safeguarding the five countries' national independence, sovereignty, territorial integrity, and social stability. Gill finishes his op-ed by noting that efforts to establish security-related mechanisms without the participation of the United States is a trend worth watching. Gill's concerns for the future of a NATO-led monopolar world proved well-founded. Within 1 month of penning his article, the five countries convened their annual summit in Shanghai, where they admitted the body's sixth member, Uzbekistan, and signed the Declaration of Shanghai Cooperation Organization. In June of 2002, just 8 months after NATO began its invasion and occupation of Afghanistan, an occupation that continues to the present day, the leaders met in St. Petersburg to sign the SCO Charter. Although not many of Gill's peers were likely to have seen the importance of this event with the clarity that Gill himself did, from these inauspicious beginnings emerged an economic, cultural, and military alliance, which is now threatening to become a serious contender for control over one of the most geostrategically important areas of the globe. This region, which arch-globalist Zbigniew Brzezinski referred to as the Eurasian Balkans in his infamous 1997 opus, The Grand Chessboard, encompasses portions of southeastern Europe, Central Asia, South Asia, the Persian Gulf, and the Middle East. In his book, Brzezinski wrote that the region is of importance from the standpoint of security and historical ambitions to at least three of their most immediate and more powerful neighbors, namely Russia, Turkey, and Iran, with China also signaling an increasing political interest in the region. But, he continued, the Eurasian Balkans are infinitely more important as a potential economic prize. An enormous concentration of natural gas and oil reserves is located in the region, in addition to important minerals, including gold. Significantly, it is this very region, which boasts not only the vast resource and mineral wealth alluded to by Brzezinski, but a geostrategically vital location providing all of the key access points to the increasingly important Caspian gas pipelines, where we can find four of the SCO's founding members, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan, and one of its guest attendees, Turkmenistan. Earlier this month I had the chance to talk to Pepe Escobar, reporter for the Asia Times Online and author of several books, including most recently Obama Does Globalistan, about the organization, its interests in this important Eurasian region, and the potential threat that it poses to the Washington-led NATO interests that desire control over the same area.
Yes, this is extremely interesting because here we have the intersection of economic interests and geopolitics in Eurasia. It's fascinating. 10 years ago, nobody would give, a nut for the future of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. They were called Shanghai Five at the time. There were three Central Asians plus Russia and China. 10 years later, there are four observers: Iran, India, Pakistan, and Mongolia. Afghanistan applied to become an observer. India and Pakistan soon will be admitted as full members. When I say soon, let's say within 1 or 2 years, because Russia at the latest meeting said, okay, we want India and Pakistan in different tracks, but as soon as possible. So as soon as possible in Asia means 2 years, roughly, right? And Iran is an important observer. They are not admitted because they are under sanctions. And according to the statute of the SCO, you cannot become a member if you are under UN sanctions. But they are trying to find a way to circumvent that because especially for China, the energy link between China and Iran is it's a matter of national security for the Chinese. So they want Iran as part of the SCO, especially in economic terms. And for the Russians, they want to expand to Pakistan, for instance, because of the Gazprom interest in the TAPI pipeline as well. So everybody now has a very firm and precise economic interest to agglutinate, especially these three key players, Iran, Pakistan, and India. So from the point of view of I would say especially the Pentagon, this is a total disaster, because this was they've been trying to prevent for not only 10 years, but for the past 20 years or so, since the fall of the Soviet Union. The SCO, it's from the point of view of China and Russia, there are differences. The Chinese view it basically as an economic cooperation organization. The Russians see it as a security organization. But now they're trying to bridge the gap and say, look, we are a mix of an economic organization and a NATO of Asia as well. They have exercises. For the moment, they have a small secretariat. They have a small office in Beijing, for instance, secretariat in Tashkent in Uzbekistan. But they're growing. A lot of diplomats in Beijing, for instance, when I talked about the SCO, they say, nah, this is not going anywhere, blah, blah. But now they're starting to say no. It's especially after this last meeting this year in St. Petersburg, where the Chinese were more forceful and the Russians said, look, we want these new members because they are important for the expansion of organization, and especially to prevent interference from outside powers. That's more or less the language in their final communique. So yes, it's organizing itself more or less as a NATO of Asia, more like a defense mechanism about Pentagon plans, for instance. Like, don't forget that the Pentagon still wants military bases in Afghanistan. There is a lawyer jerk in Afghanistan now, as we speak, with 2,000 members, including all the major tribal leaders. They are discussing exactly that. Are we going to allow the U.S. to have military bases, permanent military bases in our country? I guess the answer is going to be no. And who steps in this case? The SCO. Because the SCO, from the beginning, they have been saying, look, the only solution for Afghanistan is a regional solution. And we, as part of the SCO, the Central Asians, Russia, and China, we want to sit down with the Afghans. And the Pakistanis said, okay, all the Afghans, Taliban's, Dari-speaking people from the Panjshir Valley, Uzbeks, Hazaras, everybody, sit down and find a solution, which is not exactly what the Pentagon wants for Afghanistan, right? So here we see the merge of economic interest, political interest, and energy interests. And I'm not so sure that the Pentagon strategy, which is militarization, basically, and offering nothing else, is going to work.
As tensions begin to mount between this would-be NATO counterbalance and the NATO countries themselves, some posit that we have already seen the beginnings of what could be the future of military aggression between the two power blocs, a Cold War-like series of proxy conflicts in countries away from the center of contention. This may, in fact, have already happened in Libya. For years, a series of increasingly hysterical reports have fretted over the growing influence of China in Africa, with reports filed at the beginning of this year announcing in ominous tones that Sino-African trade was set to surpass $110 billion this year. Much of the focus has fallen on cooperative Sino-African projects and bodies like the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation, a meeting of regional leaders highlighting economic, development, and security ties between the two blocs. The meeting was hosted in 2009 by Hosni Mubarak, who spoke of the need to consolidate cooperation at both bilateral and continental levels to back African efforts to establish peace and security across the continent, just 1 year before being ousted by a supposed people's power coup that was openly supported by US officials and diplomats. Talk of Chinese cooperation in securing peace on the African continent posed such a threat that in recent years the US had been pressuring African nations to join AFRICOM, a Central Command for Africa established in the wake of China's establishment of the FOCAC. AFRICOM encouraged joint training exercises with Mali, Chad, Niger, Benin, Botswana, Cameroon, the Central African Republic, Ethiopia, Gabon, Zambia, Uganda, Senegal, Mozambique, Ghana, Malawi, and Mauritania. Libya had been a notable holdout on AFRICOM, And significantly, the New York Times ran an article shortly after the NATO-led bombing of the country began, touting AFRICOM's important role in the decimation of that country. If the bombing of Libya is an ominous sign of things to come in the new geopolitical paradigm, there are even darker clouds on the horizon as tensions flare up between key SCO members Russia and China and other of the region's hotspots, including Syria and Iran. Now, NATO intervention in Afghanistan and US intervention in Iraq seem to be reorganizing relations in the region and causing some very strange bedfellows. Both Pakistan and India, traditionally mortal enemies, are observer states in the SCO, and both are now in the process of attaining full membership. Earlier this month, I had the chance to talk to investigative journalist Wayne Madsen about the development of the SCO and the very strange political bedfellows that are being driven together out of fear of further NATO aggression.
Well, yeah, the SCO was formed basically, although they say it's not a military pact, it's not a counter to NATO, essentially it is. It consists of China and Russia, as well as some of the former states in the old Soviet Union, Central Asian states, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan. And they're looking to maybe expand. There just was a summit meeting in St. Petersburg, Russia, and it's pretty much certain that they will gain some new members. Iran is certainly a potential member. Pakistan, India, which is very interesting. We see now a lot of cooperation between India and Pakistan. I think they're looking at the issue of what's going on with the United States and Israel in the region, and they probably have come to the conclusion. And I must add in here, Hamid Karzai, who also attends these SCO meetings, said, look, if Pakistan is ever attacked by the United States, we're going to come to the assistance of Pakistan, and we will fight the United States, which is very interesting because we are the outsider in that part of the world. So our presence seems to be drawing Pakistan and India closer together. Of course, in that part of the world, everybody knows that Israel runs our foreign policy because of the tremendous power of their lobby here in Washington and the tremendous power they have over the media in New York, Washington, and Los Angeles. And so they understand when they're dealing with the United States, they're also dealing with the Israelis. And I already said the Israelis seem to have this suicidal Masada complex. And even though there's problems, of course, between Pakistan and India, they've lived side by side now as independent countries since 1947. And I think they see the United States as a very dangerous player in the region. And as far as China is concerned, we have Secretary of State Clinton, Hillary Clinton, over in the Philippines, once again ratcheting up war talk, essentially what she's doing, against China and China's influence in the region, especially the fact that the South China Sea has oil, natural gas deposits. So and then we have President Obama signing an agreement in Australia to establish 5 military bases in Australia, including a large marine base in Darwin. Now, that's obviously targeting China and the South China Sea. And so there are neocons, and neocons never lost power. They're still in the State Department. The State Department spokesperson, Victoria Nuland, is a neocon. She's married to Robert Kagan, the neocon who helped draft this crazy policy of the United States to attack and occupy Iraq. He was in that Project for a New American Century, PNAC. He was in that crowd. And so we have Dennis Ross, who was Obama's Middle East advisor, who just basically got fired, I understand. He said he was resigning, but he's considered totally in the Israeli camp. And certainly they're not the only ones. And now we have the neocons making threats against Russia and China. You have to wonder whether the Masada suicidal types are now not only in Jerusalem, but also here in Washington, D.C., because any talk of an attack any kind of military attack on Russia or China would mean instant global thermonuclear war. And again, the only people who would be suggesting that would be suicidal sociopaths, and they shouldn't even have a security clearance, let alone be working anywhere near the United States government.
14 years ago, globalist insider Zbigniew Brzezinski began his key work on the geopolitics of the 21st century by noting that ever since the continents started interacting politically some 500 years ago, Eurasia has been the center of world power. He admonished the world leaders and global power players who constitute his real readership that any successful American policy must focus on Eurasia as a whole and be guided by a geostrategic design. Now, with the creation of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and its increasing role in the formation of economic, political, and even military cooperation in the region, we see the formation of a new power bloc, one that is not within the purview of the NATO powers and threatens Western sovereignty over this vastly important region. In the coming years, this tension is only likely to increase as both sides become more entrenched and more desperate to attain control over the area before the major pipelines from the Caspian Basin come online and start hardwiring the political landscape for the benefit of certain players. And ultimately, once again it seems that it is the average citizen who will pay the greatest price in this struggle for imperial conquest, as just as in Libya, the people become little more than expendable pawns on the grand chessboard of global domination. This video is brought to you by the subscribers of BoilingFrogsPost.com. For more information on this and other topics, please go to BoilingFrogsPost.com. For more information and commentary from James Corbett, please go to CorbettReport.com.